Hi besties, welcome back. In today's video, we are talking all things NSC exams since you guys have less than 2 weeks of exam time to prepare and crunch and lock in before you start with your official NSC exams. And it is very important to highlight that this period is a very, very critical period in a lot of learners' lives. It's one of the most scariest times that a matriculant has to go through this journey every single year. And let me tell you why I think it's such a scary time. This is a very critical and very scary time for matriculants because matric results are celebrated across the country, not only just by you, not just by your parents, not just by your teacher, not just by your principal, not just by your district directors, your provincial coordinators, and the people from the department. The entire country is watching, and I understand why this is a very scary time, but it shouldn't be. The exams you just wrote, that's how your final is it's gonna be. It's just a matter of it's being set by examiners at the national level to ensure that there is consistency. Everyone is being assessed by the same assessor, if that makes sense. So make sure that one thing I want to highlight is that please refrain from spreading misinformation. This is a time where a lot of learners and parents tend to panic a lot, especially if there's information that is spreading around. So let us make sure that we do not spread misinformation and allow other people to not start panicking about things they shouldn't be panicking about. Let us share messages that are encouraging, that are very supportive, and are very accurate. Awesome. In today's video, we are discussing how to get a distinction for your paper 3. Whether that's your English file, home language, Afrikaans, Setswana, isiZulu, Xitsonga, Tshivenda, this is how you are going to get that distinction. I want you to understand this. Paper 3 accounts for 40% of your final exam mark. So without paper 3, you are not able to get a distinction in your languages, which is why it's very important for you to log in. And I'll tell you why a lot of people tend to have less or reduced performance in the languages in the final exam. That is because also some teachers tend to be biased. Your teacher's more likely to be biased because they know you and they know the kind of writing you have. Whereas at the national marking level, it's strict marking, not necessarily strict, but it's someone who's marking your script and they've never met you. So they are marking according to what the guidelines tell them. They are not adding any emotions that, I know this child. There's nothing like that. Now you need to prove yourself to these examiners. Okay, we know that our essay, let's start with first additional languages. We know that there's an essay out of 50. We have a longer transactional task out of 30, and then we have a shorter transactional task out of 20, which equates to 100. Awesome. Now I want us to get into the paper. The paper, you should make sure that when you write your final NSC paper, there are things that you need to be checking. Check that you are writing the first correct paper. Is it English file or home language? How will you know that? Remember, in home language, we have an essay and 2 transactional pieces. So typically, if you see that there's a short piece and a long piece, chances are you are writing a first additional paper. You need to write the paper that you wrote in trial. So if your English is file, you should have a long and a shorter transactional task. If not, inform your examiners. The paper is 2.5 hours. Now I want us to get into this. Time is very important. Ensure that your planning is very good and ensure that there's a title, especially if you're going to choose a pictorial stimuli. So there's a narrative, descriptive, reflective, discursive, and an argumentative. Okay? And remember that you're not sure which you're going to get at what particular point. If you are given a picture and you choose a picture, make sure that you give it a title. 60% of paper 3 is heavily on content and your planning. If you just write an essay without a plan, it's going to show. Your essay is going to be very redundant and it's going to have a lot of rambling. Make sure you think about what you want to write. Remember, for first additional language, you are very limited in terms of your word count. So make sure that your essay must highlight proper planning. So you are planning on the story that you want to tell us. or else you're just going to be all over the place and the examiners will pick this up immediately. The first idea that comes to mind, do not run with it. The first idea that comes to mind, do not run with it. Let me tell you why. If the essay question is best day of my life, and recently Tyler went to your school, for example, almost 50% of your school is going to write about that experience. And what does that give now? Very boring, redundant repetition of story. Unless if you know that the way in which you take the angle of telling that story is going to be very different, then go for it. But typically your first idea, don't go for it. Awesome. Longer transactional tasks, there are 3 categories here. And please make sure that in each category you are familiar with 1 or 2. In category A, it's either a friendly, a formal letter, a cover letter, and a CV, and an informal letter to the press or an email. Make sure you're familiar with one of these. Typically a CV and a covering letter is asked for in home language, but make sure that you know the structure. Category B is a review, a newspaper article, magazine article, agenda and minutes, formal and informal reports, or an obituary. Make sure that you know the structure. Your structure is the first thing that the examiner looks at. If your assessment doesn't have a structure, we don't know how the address is supposed to be, the salutations, then it means that you don't know what you're writing. As a result, you will not get a distinction. Okay? Very, very important. Remember, for example, if we're looking at a formal letter, it must have those 2 addresses, the salutation, the heading, and the conclusion. Okay, go and have a look at that. But I think the things you should look at for your first additional is a friendly letter, a formal letter, and an email. Please go and have a look at an email. A dialogue, a written interview, an informal and informal speech. Find ways in which you can make your speech very interesting. Because remember, this is a speech you would typically be giving out or verbally giving out. So make sure it's very exciting when the examiner reads it, and it should set the tone. If it's a formal tone, go with a formal writing. If it's informal, be able to kiki a bit, but it's an informal writing. Awesome. Now let us go to section C. Section C, there's also 3 categories. There's an advertisement, an invitation, a flyer, a poster. You must at least know how to do 2 of those. Category B, there is a diary, there's an SMS, and that is the most important thing I want to talk about. Know how to write an SMS. Please go and check a format for an SMS. Can either be a WhatsApp message, a Facebook Messenger message, but know the structure. And then the last one is instructions or directions. Once again, instructions, I'll tell you my recommendations at the end, and then we'll take it from there. However, I would not recommend you do directions unless if you're really good at them. Awesome. Make sure that your wording is concise. Remember, I spoke about planning. If you do not plan, then you're not going to get good marks. Let me show you. For your essay, for you to get good marks, you must have outstanding, striking responses that are beyond the normal expectations. Intelligent, thought-provoking, and mature ideas in the essay. It should be exceptionally well organized and coherent. Coherent means it's connecting. I'm hearing you talking about your friends going to Durban. Now I'm hearing about your grandmother. Like, the story needs to flow and make sense. I shouldn't be asking myself, wait, what's going on here? That's where planning comes. If you plan what you're going to talk about, it's going to be very easy. And then when it comes to language, style, and editing, your tone, register, and style and vocabulary is highly appropriate to purpose, audience, and context. The language, confident and exceptionally impressive. You have compelling and rhetorically very effective in your tone. Virtually error-free in grammar and spelling. If you have a spelling or a grammar error, already you are losing out on a lot of marks, especially in your first paragraph. Make sure your first paragraph and the last are very good. That's the first and the last thing the examiner marks. The first thing they mark gives them an impression of you. So if you're very clumsy and you have mistakes in your introduction, it's not looking good. Your conclusion is the last thing they read. That is the last thing that lingers in their mind. Is that a good conclusion? That is what will determine whether you get a good mark or not. And then your structure needs to have an excellent development of the topic, introduction, body, conclusion, climax. It needs to be very, very well written. And then another tip I always give learners is that when you're reading your essays, read it in read it out, not loud, but just read it and find out if it actually makes sense. Would you give yourself a distinction if you are marking for yourself by looking at this essay? Awesome. For the longer transactional task, the same thing. Make sure that your structure is very good. If your structure is not good, then you are going to have a lot of problems. One thing that I want to talk about is the diagnostic reports and my recommendations. So I'm going to share according to the diagnostic reports from the Department of Basic Education as well as the provincial ones, where learners scored the most marks and how you can make sure you score the most marks. When it comes to essays, topics where you are given a title versus those where you have to make your own title, it seems that a lot of learners tend to do well when they have to choose their own topic, because now you're not boxed into whatever you have to say. You come up with your own topic that aligns with the image that you've been given. So that is both for first additional as well as home languages. However, it seems that in home language, a lot of learners tend to not do so well when they're given an image. And this is where I'm going to tell you my opinion. So I believe that if you've never chosen a picture in your entire life, you do not want to experiment with your final exam, because you might just interpret it in a way that is actually not so accurate. I once did that. I thought I could see so many things in that, but I ended up not doing well because I was experimenting, and that was during exams. So if you're someone who's always historically chosen essays that you're given at the top, please do go with that. Please do go with that and make sure that you do not change. Now let us talk about this. So section A is an essay. The word limit is very important. Please do not ramble. You need to have concise writing with a strong link to the title. Your essay should link very well to the title. After reading your essay, I should be able to be like, did you answer what the essay question wanted? We get that. When we go to the introduction, please avoid, and I am saying avoid because, yes, if we are doing the introduction, I avoid starting your essay with, in this essay, I will. You have already failed. Because this, we want you to be concise. Like, start. Don't tell me you want to start by this. Start discussing. Don't tell me. I want to see the discussion. Rather make an opening statement that sets the tone of your essay. I've always wondered actually whether being a female is fun. That's an interesting way of starting an essay. You're not saying, in this essay I'll be discussing. Don't say that. Remember that you're not presenting for a debate here. You are here to write a story. And then when it comes to your conclusion, a lot of learners do not end their conclusions very well. Remember, a strong conclusion is as equally important as a strong introduction. The conclusion is the last thing the examiner sees before they allocate you marks. It's the last thing they hear before they award you marks. Very important that your conclusion is strong. Remember, if you have an anticlimax, it can really impact a good piece of writing. And avoid writing you are concluding or in conclusion. Like, we already know it's the conclusion. Conclude. We want to see you conclude. Don't tell me in conclusion. It is no, just conclude. Conclude. Let's hear what you're saying. Let us hear what you're saying. And remember that your conclusion cannot have new information that you didn't discuss in your essay. Then it's not a conclusion, is it now? Okay? Very important. Please make sure that when it comes to this part, let me just tell you what the department says. When it comes to essay writing, a lot of learners really do well, hey? However, a lot of learners struggle with analysis of the pictures. Now let us go to section B. Section B is your transactional pieces, remember? Now let us hear what the examiner said. A lot of people tend to do very bad in terms of a magazine article. Okay? It is slightly challenging for a lot of learners. But the interview, remember when you're doing an interview, you cannot respond in an essay. It needs to be in that dialogue structure. But it should really not be that. Let me tell you. Remember that if you're given a story or like a paragraph on what you need to talk about, it is very important that you still answer the question at the end of the day. Okay? That is the most critical thing. And the last thing is that learners lose a lot of marks because of poor formats. If you're struggling with formats, go to the Department of Basic Education, check the Mind Action, and check the memorandum. The memorandum will give you an idea of what they want. Okay? Please run away from choosing a topic you don't understand. Choose something that you understand. Punctuation is a common mistake learners make. Capital letters are very important when you have to write people's names and you start new sentences. Punctuation is very neglected, which means that your writing doesn't have a pause or a stop or an emotion or no proper paragraphing. If you're going to write your essay as one big chunk paragraph, then it's not structured. Okay? And avoid overusing certain punctuations such as exclamation. Try and stick to one exclamation mark, or at least two. But like we already have an idea of what you're trying to do. Okay? Sentence construction is something that is very, very critical in this paper. My last recommendations, a narrative essay is always the best essay according to me, because you are telling a story in your own manner. Whereas compared to you talking about why AI is a threat to the country, that one you need to be a very well-read learner. Because remember there, we're not just judging you on the writing, but also on the things that you're saying. Is it true? But with narrative, if I told you I met Beyonce and we had dinner, you cannot say no, because it's my story. You get that? And then when it comes to a dialogue, a friendly letter and a formal letter, actually a lot of people tend to score very high there. And when it comes to a diary and an invitation, people tend to also get a lot of marks in that component. So do make sure that you pay attention to those. Good luck, besties. Please do make sure that you stay tuned for the next paper update. Bye.